Here we have modern white-black tokens. I decided to go ahead and take a page out of Craig Wesco's book this week, and this deck just recently got some reprints and Eternal Masters. Intangible Virtue is the main one, but we've also got Zealous Persecution, Raise the Alarm, and the deck is a typical mid-range deck, but it's got a nice token element to it. That's how it wins games, is with a variety of creature tokens. So let's go over some of the lands here. A bunch of different white and black lands here. There's fetch lands, there's Godless Shrine, there's some basics, there's even Fetid Heaths. So there's more of an emphasis on white because we do have Spectral Procession and Aria Champion in the deck. We want to have double white and even triple white on turn 3 if possible. But there's also a lot of black in the deck too, and we want black as early as turn 1, so getting a Godless Shrine early makes a lot of sense. There's 3 copies of Shambling Vent here as our creature land. Sometimes it's nice to just have some life gain in a deck with Bitter Blossom and Thoughtseize, so it does some extra work there. There's also another life gain land, and that's Vault of the Archangel. It's just a singleton here, but being able to give our tokens Death Touch and Lifelink is pretty nice. There's a lot of interesting lands in the deck that aren't just plains and swamps. There's 3 copies of Ghost Quarter. Ghost Quarter it just seems like continues to be played more and more and more. It's good against man lands, it's good against Tron, so there's always going to be applications for Ghost Quarter. We can even use it on one of our own lands, Flagstones of Drokair. So we can just go ahead, sack our Ghost Quarter on the Flagstones, and help us actually fix our lands. And my favorite land, which hasn't been mentioned yet, is Windbrisk Heights. So Windbrisk Heights comes into play, you hide away one of your top 4 cards, and then later on you're bound to play some sort of token generation. And so at some point in the game, it's pretty likely that you will have 3 tokens that you want to attack with, and then just simply flipping a card over from Windbrisk Heights can just be devastating for your opponent. So there's 2 copies. I wanted to actually fit more in, but we don't want too many lands that come into play tapped. So the mana base is nice, 26 lands total. And so let's move on to some of the spells here. There's essentially 6 straight spot removal spells, starting at Path to Exile and Slaughter Pact, and then we've also got Murderous Cut. So a little bit of a variety here. And then discard can also be used as a way to hurt your opponent's creatures, to stop them from doing what they want to do. And so this deck is loading up on discard. There's 4 copies of Inquisition of Kozilek, which is the most played discard spell in Modern right now, over Thoughtseize, just because not losing 2 life against decks like Burn and Zoo ends up being very important. Thoughtseize is also here. There's always going to be cards that cost more than 3 that you're worried about. And so Thoughtseize can help shore up that problem. And we even have more discard in the sideboard. So discard is a pretty important part of this deck, especially against the combo decks, since we don't have a ton of ways to interact with those decks. So let's look at some of the token generation. On turn 2, we can Raise the Alarm. There's a single copy of Raise the Alarm. And there's also 3 copies of Bitter Blossom here. There's not 4 because normally with this deck you don't actually want 2 Bitter Blossoms because of the life loss, but having a continuous stream of tokens off Bitter Blossom can win the game pretty easily, especially against other mid-range and control decks. The other creature that we have at 2 mana is Aria Champion. So not only does this card gain life when you put creatures onto the board, it gains life when your opponent has creatures put into play, and it has protection from red and protection from black. The protection from red is very nice against burn decks and that sort of strategy. And so, besides the creature generation, we've got Intangible Virtue here as our primary Anthem effect, a way to buff up our tokens, make it easier to close the game out, and at only 2 mana, having both Vigilance and +1/+1 is very worthwhile. And we've also got one copy of Zealous Persecution. This card has been surprisingly very nice. Against any deck that has 1 toughness creatures, it can be a huge blowout. Your opponent will not expect to come in, especially in the main deck. But on turn 3, we're really just focusing now completely on generating tokens. We've got some ways to generate them on turn 2, but now on turn 3, we're just full-blown 4 Lingering Souls. Lingering Souls is the best way to generate creature tokens in Modern, period. So we're playing 4 of those. Then there's also a couple of Spectral Processions and Timely Reinforcements. Timely Reinforcements definitely has its moments when you're low on life. Sometimes, though, it can be difficult to turn on against decks that don't have a lot of creatures. Overall, though, these are going to provide us a lot of flying attackers, so having flying actually turns out to be really important in Modern. Affinity throws fits as soon as you cast a Lingering Souls or Spectral Procession. Then we've got our late game spells, essentially, our big mana Planeswalkers. They're not exactly big mana, they're 4 mana Planeswalkers. They can be used as anthems. They can also be used as ways to generate creature tokens. So they play a couple different roles. The other role that they play is that they can just be hard to get off the board. We already know that about Planeswalkers. And we're starting to see more and more Planeswalkers see play in Modern. So this is the main deck. Let's go ahead and move on to the sideboard, because in any given matchup, we're going to have cards we want to board out. Especially with this deck, because we've got cards like Auric Champion, Timely Reinforcements, and then we've also got cards like Thoughtseize, cards like Bitter Blossom that are going to lose us life. So we've got some life gain and some life loss, and inevitably one of those effects is going to be good against your opponent, and one of them is likely not to be so good. So, looking at the board, we've got a couple more discard spells. Duress is playable across many formats, Modern being one. 2 copies of Grafdigger's Cage. Grafdigger's Cage is the graveyard removal / creature search removal, essentially, of this format. It continues to get more and more play, and sometimes you'll just play it turn 1 against a dredge deck, and they'll be like, yep, that's it. I mean, that's the game. So that's why you need a card like that in the sideboard nowadays. There's 1 copy of Engineered Explosives. This deck is normally just playing explosives on 1. Sometimes you'll play it on 2. And there's definitely decks where you just want it. It's a utility card. It's not generally insane, but there will be spots where you get a 2-for-1 and it provides some nice value. There's another Zealous Persecution against decks like Affinity and Infect. We've got a bunch of Affinity cards, actually, because that's one of our best matchups. We are playing 3 Stony Silences and 1 Disenchant. The Disenchant can be used against any enchantment-based deck or a Blood Moon type deck, so don't forget about Disenchant. Has a lot more abilities than just destroying an artifact. Enchantments are pretty relevant in Modern nowadays as well. And so Anguished Unmaking is quite similar to Disenchant in that it can deal with any permanent. So this is a card that hasn't yet made its splash into Modern just because it was very recently printed, but I do expect it to start seeing some play in Modern. It does cause you to lose 3 life. That's why it's not in the main deck here, though there's definitely an argument that it could be main decked. trying one out. It can deal with a bunch of troublesome permanents, and it seems like it's good, especially because it can exile a creature. A card like, say, Kitchen Finks. So we've got the Anguish to Making. We've also got another singleton here in Worship. This is a card that can just win the game for you, depending on the deck, and depending on what answers your opponent might or might not have to this card. It is just a one-of because there will be a lot of situations where it's not good, but when it is good, it's just amazing, and it will normally win you the game. The last card here is the Fulminator Mage. There's 3 copies of Fulminator Mage. Non-basic lands are very prevalent in Modern. It's specifically nice against any Valakut deck or Tron deck, and it comes in other matchups as well. So Fulminator Mage is just a versatile card. It's a creature that can attack, but more often than not, it's just used as a Stone Raid, and that's pretty good. So this is white-black tokens. Pretty excited to go into battle with it.